The smell of betrayal has a particular scent, like expensive perfume mixed with lies and a hint of desperation. I should know. I've been breathing it for 3 months now. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Robert Mitchell, and at 42, I thought I had life figured out. Decent job as a financial advisor at Henderson & Associates, a house in the suburbs that cost more than my father made in a lifetime, and a wife who still looked good in the morning light. Jane and I had been married 16 years, raised 2 kids who barely tolerated us, and settled into that comfortable rhythm of middle-aged mediocrity. Then her cousin Derek moved to town. It was a Tuesday night in October when everything started unraveling. I was nursing a scotch and watching the late news when Jane slipped into the living room wearing that black dress, the one she used to wear for me. "I'm meeting Derek and some of his friends at the Avalon," she said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Don't wait up." The Avalon, at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. Right. "Since when do you go out on weeknights?" I asked, muting the television. She turned, and for just a second I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt? Annoyance? Hard to tell with Jane these days. "Since my cousin asked me to help him network. He's trying to break into tech consulting, remember? I told you this." She had told me. Derek Morrison, 35, recently divorced, and blessed with the kind of easy charm that made people forget. He'd never held a job for more than 2 years. He'd shown up at our Labor Day barbecue with a sob story about starting fresh and a smile that made Jane giggle like a teenager. "Right," I said. "Networking." Jane grabbed her purse and keys. "Try not to sound so bitter, Robert. It's not attractive." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving me alone with my scotch and a growing certainty that my wife was lying through her perfectly whitened teeth. I should have gone to bed, should have trusted my wife of 16 years, should have been a better man. Instead, I drove to the Avalon. The bar was one of those upscale places downtown that charged $18 for a martini and played jazz just loud enough to make conversation feel intimate. I found a corner table with a clear view of the main seating area and ordered a beer I couldn't taste. Jane was there all right, sitting in a curved booth with Derek and 2 other people I didn't recognize, a blonde woman in her 40s and a guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. They were laughing at something Derek had said, and Jane was leaning into him like they were sharing secrets. Maybe they were just family. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe. Derek's hand slid across the table and covered Jane's. She didn't pull away. I watched my wife of 16 years smile at her cousin in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. Watched her lean closer when he whispered something in her ear. Watched her nod eagerly when fashion magazine guy pulled out what looked like a business card. The blonde woman glanced around the bar nervously, then slid a manila envelope across the table. Derek opened it, showed the contents to Jane, and she nodded again. Fashion magazine guy made notes on his phone. This wasn't networking. This was something else entirely. I finished my beer and left before they could spot me. The drive home felt like swimming through molasses. Everything slow and thick and wrong. Jane's car wasn't in the driveway when I pulled in. Wouldn't be for another 2 hours. I poured another scotch and sat in my home office, staring at the family photos on my desk. Jane and me on our wedding day, both of us young and stupid and convinced we'd beat the odds. The kids at various ages, gap-toothed and grinning. Family vacations to places we couldn't afford, but went anyway because that's what families do. When had it all started feeling like a performance? Jane came home at 2:15, moving through the house like a ghost. I heard her in the bathroom, running water, brushing her teeth. The bedroom door closed softly. By the time I went upstairs, she was either asleep or pretending to be. I lay in the dark next to my wife and wondered what the hell I was going to do. The answer came the next morning in the form of an email from an account I didn't recognize. realfriend47gmail.com. Subject: You should know. The message was short and to the point. Your wife isn't just networking with Derek. Check his LinkedIn profile. Then ask yourself why a tech consultant needs to meet with Sophie Lake from Meridian Industries at midnight. Sophie Lake. I knew that name. Meridian Industries was one of our biggest competitors, the kind of company that poached clients and employees with equal enthusiasm. And Sophie Lake was their head of business development, the blonde woman from the bar. I pulled up Derek's LinkedIn profile and felt my stomach drop. According to his recent updates, he wasn't looking for work in tech consulting. He was already employed as a senior analyst at Meridian Industries. Had been for 3 months. 3 months, right around the time he'd moved to town. My phone buzzed. A text from Jane. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. I stared at the message until the words blurred together. Then I forwarded the anonymous email to my personal account and started making plans. The thing about being an underdog is that people underestimate you. They see the receding hairline, the slight gut, the off-the-rack suits, and they assume you're harmless, forgettable, safe. They're usually right, but not always. I spent the next 3 days playing the part of the oblivious husband while quietly gathering intelligence. Jane was definitely working late, if by working late you meant having dinner with Derek at restaurants across town. I knew because I followed them twice, staying far enough back to avoid detection, but close enough to see Derek's hand on her lower back as they walked into Romano's on Thursday night. The sight should have made me angry. Instead, it made me calculating. Friday afternoon, I drove to Murphy's boxing gym on the south side of town. It wasn't much to look at, a converted warehouse that smelled like sweat and ambition, but it had been my sanctuary for the past 5 years. 3 days a week, I came here to hit things and pretend I was still the kind of man who could solve problems with his fists. Mick Torino was waiting for me at the heavy bag, wrapping his gnarled hands with practiced efficiency. At 68, Mick had forgotten more about fighting than most people ever learned. He'd trained professional boxers back in the day, before arthritis and age relegated him to teaching weekend warriors like me how to throw a proper jab. "You look like shit, Bobby," he said without preamble. "Worse than usual, I mean." "Thanks for the pep talk, Mick." He grinned, showing teeth that had seen better decades. "What's eating you? And don't tell me it's work. You get that same constipated look when you're thinking about quarterly reports." I started working the bag, letting my frustrations flow through my fists. Left jab, right cross, left hook. The rhythm was meditative, familiar. "Jane's cheating on me," I said between combinations. Mick nodded like I'd told him the weather forecast. "I figured. She stopped pretending to care about your hobbies yet?" "How did you—" "Been married 4 times, kid. I know the signs." He adjusted my stance with a gentle push. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" I threw a particularly hard right cross that made the bag swing. "I don't know. Confront her? Get a divorce lawyer?" "All solid options," Mick said. "Or you could get creative." "What do you mean?" Mick stopped the swaying bag with both hands and looked at me seriously. "You ever hear the story about the mouse and the elephant?" "No." "Mouse gets stepped on by an elephant. Could cry about it, could run away, could get eaten by the first cat that comes along. Or," he paused for effect, "could figure out what elephants are really afraid of." "What are elephants afraid of?" "Mice, Bobby. They're afraid of mice." I stared at him. "That doesn't make any sense." "Course it doesn't. That's what makes it work." Mick started unwrapping his hands. "Your wife thinks she's got you figured out. Thinks you're going to roll over and take it like a good little husband. Prove her wrong." That night, I broke into Jane's home office. Broke in might be too strong a term. I used the spare key she kept in her desk drawer to unlock the filing cabinet where she stored her laptop when she wasn't using it. Jane had always been paranoid about computer security, ironic considering what I was about to discover. Her password was our anniversary date. Some things never change. The emails told the whole story. 3 months of correspondence between Jane, Derek, and Sophie Lake. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Jane would use her position as marketing manager at Henderson & Associates to gather intelligence on our client strategies, upcoming mergers, and competitive weaknesses. Derek would serve as the middleman, passing information to Sophie at Meridian Industries. In exchange, Jane would receive a signing bonus and a senior position at Meridian once the transition period was complete. The transition period. That was corporate speak for after we destroy your husband's company. But the professional betrayal wasn't the worst part. Mixed in with the business emails were personal messages that made my hands shake as I read them. "Robert's been so suspicious lately," Jane had written to Derek 2 weeks ago. "I think he knows something's up. Good thing he's too much of a coward to actually confront me about it." Derek's response: "Don't worry about Bobby. Guy's spent so many years getting stepped on, he probably thinks it's foreplay. Besides, after Meridian makes their move, you won't have to pretend to be happily married much longer. And then, the one that made me close the laptop and sit in the dark for 20 minutes. I can't wait to be done with this charade," Jane had written. 16 years of pretending to love a man who bores me to tears. At least when this is over, I'll have enough money to make the divorce worthwhile." I sat in my wife's office, surrounded by the debris of my marriage, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Not anger. Anger was hot and messy and stupid. This was something else. Something patient and methodical and very, very dangerous. Jane thought she was married to a coward. Derek thought I was harmless. Sophie Lake probably didn't think about me at all. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The beautiful thing about being underestimated is that it gives you room to maneuver. While Jane and Derek were busy playing corporate spy games, I was building a case that would destroy them both. I started with the obvious stuff: screenshots of emails, printed copies of text messages, a detailed timeline of Jane's late nights, cross-referenced with Derek's social media posts. The digital trail was damning, but I needed more. I needed proof that would hold up in court and ruin them in the court of public opinion. That's where my friend Tommy Nguyen came in handy. Tommy ran a small private investigation firm downtown, the kind of place that specialized in insurance fraud and cheating spouses. We'd known each other since college, back when he was studying criminal justice and I was pretending to understand economics. He owed me a favor from when I'd helped him navigate a messy audit 3 years ago. "You sure about this, Bobby?" Tommy asked, reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. We were sitting in his cluttered office above a Vietnamese restaurant, the smell of pho drifting up through the floorboards. "Once we document this stuff officially, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I said. "How long will it take?" "Give me a week. 2 at the most." Tommy leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. "What's your end game here? Divorce? Custody battle?" I smiled, and Tommy's expression grew worried. "Something like that." The next few days were a masterclass in self-control. Jane continued her charade of working late while Derek played the concerned family member, even stopping by the house twice to check on things. I played along, nodding sympathetically when Jane complained about her demanding boss and thanking Derek for being such a supportive cousin. "Family's important," Derek said during one of his visits, helping himself to a beer from my refrigerator. "Jane's lucky to have someone like you who understands that." "I'm learning a lot about family lately," I replied. "Amazing what you discover when you really pay attention." Derek didn't catch the subtext. He was too busy scrolling through his phone, probably texting Sophie Lake about their next move. The breakthrough came on a Wednesday night. Jane was at another client dinner when my phone rang. Tommy's name appeared on the screen. "We hit the jackpot," he said without preamble. "How fast can you get down here?" I made it to Tommy's office in 15 minutes. He had photographs spread across his desk like a winning poker hand. Derek and Sophie Lake entering a hotel downtown, Jane joining them an hour later, all 3 of them in what appeared to be an intense business meeting in the hotel bar. "That's not the good part," Tommy said, grinning. "Check this out." He handed me a manila folder thick with documents. Bank records showing regular payments from Meridian Industries to a consulting firm owned by Derek, phone records proving daily communication between all 3 conspirators, and, most damning of all, a copy of a contract between Jane and Meridian Industries, backdated to 3 months ago. "How did you get this?" I asked. Sophie Lake's assistant used to work for a client of mine. Turns out she's been skimming documents for months, building her own insurance policy in case things go south. She was happy to share when I explained the situation. I stared at the contract, focusing on the compensation clause. Jane was set to receive a $200,000 signing bonus plus a senior VP salary once Meridian successfully poached 3 major clients from Henderson and Associates. My clients. "There's more," Tommy said, pulling out another set of photos. "Ho Chiang, your wife and her cousin aren't just business partners." The photographs were taken through a hotel room window, grainy but unmistakable. Jane and Derek in an embrace that was definitely not familial. I set the photos down carefully, surprised by how calm I felt. Incest and corporate espionage, Jane really knows how to multitask. "Bobby, I'm sorry. I know this isn't easy." "Actually, it is easy," I said, gathering up the documents. "This makes everything much simpler." Tommy looked confused, but I was already planning my next move. Jane and Derek thought they were playing chess while I played checkers. Time to show them I'd been playing a different game entirely. The confrontation happened on Friday night at Rossetti's, an upscale Italian place where Jane was having dinner with Derek and 2 other people I didn't recognize. I walked in like I owned the place, which, considering how much money I'd spent there over the years, wasn't far from the truth. "Robert!" Jane's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, guilt, annoyance, and finally a forced smile. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for my wife," I said pleasantly, pulling up a chair without being invited. "Funny thing. I called your office, and they said you left at noon for a doctor's appointment." The 2 strangers at the table, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit and a younger woman who screamed corporate lawyer, looked uncomfortable. Derek, on the other hand, leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "Bobby, right? Jane's mentioned you." Derek's tone was condescending, like he was talking to a child. We were just discussing some business opportunities. Pretty boring stuff. Business opportunities, I repeated. With Meridian Industries? The temperature at the table dropped about 20 degrees. Jane's face went pale, and the two strangers exchanged glances that screamed, "Abort mission." "I think there's been some confusion," the older man said, starting to stand. "Perhaps we should reschedule." "Sit down, Mr. Peterson," I said calmly. The man froze. "Yes, I know who you are. Senior partner at Meridian's legal department, and Ms. Walsh here handles their contract negotiations." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photo Tommy had taken earlier that week. "Smile, everyone. I'm sure this will look great in the lawsuit." Jane found her voice. "Robert, you're embarrassing yourself. These people are corporate raiders," I finished, "and you're helping them steal my clients. Our clients. The ones who trusted us with their life savings and retirement plans." Derek leaned forward, his smirk fading. "You don't know what you're talking about, Bobby. Don't I?" I pulled out the contract with Jane's signature on it. $200,000. That's what my wife is worth, apparently. Though I have to ask, is that for the corporate espionage or the other services she's been providing? I slid one of Tommy's photos across the table. Jane gasped, Derek went red, and the two Meridian employees decided they had urgent business elsewhere. "We'll be in touch," Peterson mumbled, grabbing his briefcase. "No, you won't," I said, "because if I see either of you within 100 yards of my wife again, the next conversation we have will be with the FBI's Corporate Crimes Division." They left without another word, practically running for the exit. Derek stood up slowly, his hands clenched into fists. "You think you're clever, don't you, Bobby?" "Cleverer than you, apparently. Tell me, Derek, does the family know you're sleeping with your cousin? Or is that another one of those business opportunities you've been exploring?" Derek took a step toward me, and I smiled. 5 years of boxing training might not make me a professional fighter, but it was more than enough to handle a soft corporate spy, who probably hadn't thrown a punch since middle school. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "Give me a reason." Jane grabbed Derek's arm. "Stop it, both of you." She turned to me with tears in her eyes. Real ones, for once. "Robert, please. We can work this out. We can what, Jane? Go back to pretending you love me? Go back to you stealing from my clients while you screw your cousin on the side?" I stood up, dropping a 50 on the table. "The only thing we're going to work out is how much this divorce is going to cost you." I walked away, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their conspiracy. Behind me, I heard Jane start to cry and Derek curse under his breath. Phase 1 was complete. Now the real fun could begin. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I've always preferred mine with a side of public humiliation and a garnish of financial ruin. The weekend after the restaurant confrontation, I put my plan into motion. Jane had barricaded herself in our bedroom, coming out only to make hushed phone calls that ended abruptly whenever I appeared. Derek, meanwhile, had gone radio silent. No more surprise visits or concerned cousin routine, but Sophie Lake was just getting started. The first shot across the bow came Monday morning in the form of a cease and desist letter delivered to my office. Meridian Industries was accusing me of harassment, defamation, and interference with legitimate business relationships. They wanted a formal apology, a promise to stay away from their employees, and damages in the amount of $50,000. I was still laughing when my boss, Harold Henderson, knocked on my office door. "Robert, we need to talk." Harold was old school, 72 years old, still wore three-piece suits, and believed that a man's word was his bond. He'd built Henderson and Associates from nothing over 4 decades, and his client list read like a who's who of the city's elite. "What can I do for you, Harold?" He sat down across from my desk, his face grim. "I got an interesting phone call this morning. From Sophie Lake at Meridian Industries." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. "Oh?" "She says you've been harassing their employees, making wild accusations about corporate espionage. She's threatening to go to the state licensing board if we don't rein you in." I leaned back in my chair, studying Harold's face. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her I'd look into it." Harold's eyes were sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "So I'm looking into it? What's going on, Robert?" This was the moment of truth. I could play it safe, deny everything, and hope the whole mess would blow over. Or I could trust the man who'd been like a father to me for the past 12 years. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out Tommy's file. "Jane's been selling our client information to Meridian Industries for 3 months," I said, sliding the documents across the desk. "Her cousin Derek Morrison is the middleman, and Sophie Lake is orchestrating the whole operation." Harold's face went through the same progression of emotions I'd experienced a week earlier. disbelief, anger, and finally cold calculation. He spent 20 minutes reviewing the evidence, asking pointed questions, and taking notes in his precise handwriting. This is, he paused, searching for the right word, comprehensive. It gets better, I said, pulling out the hotel photos. Jane and Derek aren't just business partners. Harold studied the photographs with the same clinical detachment he brought to financial planning. Your wife is having an affair with her cousin while conspiring to destroy our company. That's the situation in a nutshell, yes. Harold set the photos down and looked at me directly. What do you want to do about it? I want to destroy them, I said without hesitation. All of them, professionally, financially, and socially. I want them to understand what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. A slow smile spread across Harold's face. Now, you're talking my language. The counterattack began immediately. Harold had connections throughout the financial services industry, people who owed him favors, respected his judgment, and trusted his word implicitly. By Tuesday afternoon, word was spreading through the professional community about Meridian Industries' unethical recruitment practices. But that was just the opening move. Wednesday morning, I drove to the offices of the city's largest newspaper and sat down with Margaret Torres, their business reporter. Margaret had covered financial services for 15 years, and she had a reputation for thorough, devastating, investigative pieces. This is quite a story, she said, reviewing the documents I'd provided. Corporate espionage, family betrayal, sexual scandal. It's got everything except murder. Give it time, I said. Margaret laughed. I'll need to verify everything independently, of course, and I'll have to give all parties a chance to respond. Of course. How far do you want me to dig? I thought about Jane's email calling me a coward, Derek's smug assumption that I'd roll over and take it, Sophie Lake's arrogant cease and desist letter. All the way down, I said. Whatever you find, print it. The article ran on Friday morning, front page of the business section, with the headline, Local Financial Firm Targeted in Elaborate Corporate Espionage Scheme. Margaret had done her homework. The piece detailed Meridian Industries' pattern of aggressive client poaching, complete with quotes from former employees who described a culture of anything-goes competition. She'd interviewed 3 other financial advisors who suspected Meridian of using inside information to steal their clients. And then there were the personal details. The scheme allegedly involved Jane Mitchell, a marketing manager at Henderson and Associates, who was accused of passing confidential client information to her cousin, Derek Morrison, a Meridian Industries analyst. Sources close to the investigation suggest the relationship between Morrison and Mitchell may have extended beyond family ties. Jane called me at work 20 minutes after the paper hit the stands. You bastard, she said without preamble. You destroyed me. You destroyed yourself, I replied calmly. I just documented it. The kids are going to see this. My parents, my friends, everyone I work with. Should have thought of that before you decided to screw your cousin and steal from my clients. There was a long pause. When Jane spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, more desperate. What do you want, Robert? Money? The house? I'll give you whatever you want if you just make this stop. I want you to understand something, Jane. For 16 years, I tried to be the husband you wanted. Boring, predictable, safe. I worked 60-hour weeks to pay for a lifestyle we couldn't afford, ignored your contempt, and convinced myself that marriage was supposed to feel like slow-motion drowning. Robert, I'm not finished. My voice was steady, controlled. You thought I was weak? You thought I'd never fight back. You were wrong. Please, Jane whispered. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Now you get to live with the consequences. I hung up and went back to work. Outside my office window, I could see the city spreading out in all directions. Millions of people living their lives, making their choices, dealing with their consequences. Soon, Jane and Derek and Sophie Lake would understand what those consequences looked like. The thing about burning bridges is that sometimes you have to make sure everyone sees the flames. 2 weeks after Margaret Torres' article ran, the fallout was spectacular. Meridian Industries was under investigation by the State Attorney General's Office for Corporate Espionage. Derek had been fired and was facing potential criminal charges. Jane had been suspended from her job pending an internal review, but Sophie Lake was still standing, and that was a problem. She'd managed to distance herself from the scandal, claiming Derek had acted without authorization and that she'd been misled about the source of his information. The corporate lawyers were earning their fees, spinning a narrative that painted Sophie as a victim of rogue employees rather than the architect of the scheme. I couldn't let that stand. The opportunity came in the form of the annual Financial Services Excellence Awards, a black-tie gala that drew every major player in the city's financial community. Henderson and Associates was being honored for ethical business practices, a delicious irony that wasn't lost on me. Sophie Lake would be there, representing Meridian Industries and trying to rebuild her reputation. So would Jane, who'd somehow managed to secure an invitation through her professional association. I had a different kind of invitation in mind. The gala was held at the Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, a gleaming monument to corporate excess that overlooked the city's financial district. I arrived fashionably late, wearing my best tuxedo and carrying a small device that Tommy Nguyen had provided, a wireless microphone transmitter that could hijack the hotel's sound system with the push of a button. The ballroom was packed with the city's financial elite, all of them networking and schmoozing and pretending to care about ethical business practices. I spotted Sophie Lake near the bar, surrounded by a small circle of admirers who were either unaware of the scandal or choosing to ignore it. Jane was across the room, looking elegant and fragile in a black evening gown that probably cost more than most people made in a month. She was talking to a group of women from her professional association, no doubt trying to salvage what was left of her reputation. Derek was nowhere to be seen. Smart man. I made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations on Henderson and Associates award and making small talk with colleagues and competitors. Everyone was very polite, very professional, very careful not to mention the elephant in the room. That was about to change. The awards ceremony began at 8 o'clock sharp. Harold Henderson took the stage to accept our award, delivering a gracious speech about the importance of trust and integrity in financial services. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. When Harold finished, the Master of Ceremonies began introducing the evening's keynote speaker, some corporate consultant who specialized in crisis management. How appropriate. I waited until the speaker was halfway through his opening remarks, then activated Tommy's device. The feedback screech that erupted from the sound system made everyone in the ballroom wince and cover their ears. When the noise stopped, my voice filled the room, clear and conversational. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Robert Mitchell from Henderson and Associates, and I have something I'd like to share with you. Chaos erupted. Hotel staff ran toward the sound booth while security guards scanned the crowd looking for the source of the disruption. On stage, the keynote speaker looked around in confusion, his microphone over. 2 weeks ago, you read about a corporate espionage scheme targeting my company. What you didn't read was the whole story. I could see Sophie Lake pushing through the crowd toward the exit, her face pale with panic. Jane had gone rigid, staring at the speakers like they might explode. The mastermind behind the scheme wasn't some rogue employee acting without authorization. It was Sophie Lake, Senior Vice President at Meridian Industries, who personally recruited my wife to steal confidential client information. The audio technicians had found the source of the hijack and were working frantically to cut the connection. I had maybe 30 seconds before they shut me down. Ms. Lake promised my wife $200,000 and a senior position at Meridian in exchange for betraying the clients who trusted us with their life savings. She orchestrated a conspiracy that violated state and federal laws, destroyed families, and corrupted the very foundation of our profession. Sophie had reached the ballroom doors, but they were locked from the outside, standard security protocol during major events. She was trapped with everyone else. But here's the part that really bothers me, I continued, my voice echoing through the stunned silence. She did it all while lecturing the rest of us about professional ethics and industry standards. She sat on the board of the Professional Conduct Committee while personally orchestrating the biggest financial services scandal in the city's history. The audio cut out abruptly, but the damage was done. 800 of the city's most influential financial professionals had just heard Sophie Lake accused of corporate espionage and professional corruption. The story would be all over social media before the appetizers were served. Security guards were moving through the crowd now, trying to locate me, but I was already heading for the service elevator that Tommy had scouted earlier. The hotel's security cameras had mysterious blind spots, and the service corridors were surprisingly easy to navigate if you knew where you were going. I made it to the parking garage without being detected, but I wasn't alone. Sophie Lake was waiting by my car, her elegant evening gown incongruous in the harsh fluorescent lighting. "You son of a jerk," she said, her composure finally cracking. "You just destroyed my career." "Your career destroyed itself," I replied, walking toward her slowly. "I just provided the documentation." "You think you've won? You think this is over?" Sophie's voice was shaking with rage. "I'll sue you into bankruptcy. I'll have you charged with harassment, defamation, invasion of privacy." "With what evidence?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. "This conversation is being recorded and live-streamed to a secure server. Anything you say right now will be part of the public record." Sophie stared at the phone, then at me, her face cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Finally, she laughed, a bitter, broken sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "You know what the funny thing is, Robert? I actually respected you. When Jane first approached us with her proposal, I thought she was crazy. My husband will never suspect anything, she said. He's too weak to fight back. She was wrong. Yes, she was. Sophie stepped closer, her eyes glittering with malice. But you want to know what she was right about? You are weak. Because a strong man would have just divorced his cheating wife and moved on. Instead, you've spent months orchestrating this elaborate revenge fantasy, destroying everyone around you just to prove you're not the pathetic loser we all thought you were. Maybe, I said. But at least I'm not the one whose career just ended in front of 800 witnesses. Sophie's face went white. She raised her hand like she was going to slap me, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the concrete like a countdown timer. I got in my car and drove home, where Jane was waiting in the living room with 2 suitcases and a lawyer. I want a divorce, she said without preamble. No contest, no alimony, no custody battle. I'll take my personal belongings and disappear. In exchange, you don't press criminal charges. I looked at my wife of 16 years, really looked at her, and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just a vast emptiness where my marriage used to be. Deal, I said. Jane nodded and picked up her suitcases. At the door, she turned back one last time. For what it's worth, Robert, I am sorry. Not about Derek or the money or any of that. I'm sorry I never saw who you really were. No, you're not, I said. You're sorry you got caught. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and I was alone in the house that had never really felt like home. Outside, I could hear the city humming with life, people falling in love, making mistakes, building dreams, destroying them. I poured myself a scotch and sat in my office, surrounded by the debris of my marriage and the documentation of my revenge. Tomorrow, there would be consequences to face, legal battles to fight, a life to rebuild from scratch. But tonight, I was exactly where I wanted to be.